Before we get into it, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a moment unfold live and thought, that just changed everything? If you've ever witnessed a shift in power happen in real time, you know how unforgettable it feels. So, hit that like button, drop a comment below telling us where you're tuning in from. And if moments like these matter to you, make sure you're subscribed for more. It all began in a packed congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. The air was heavy with anticipation. After nearly 5 hours of debate, discussions, and back-and-forth arguments about federal oversight, things had settled into a sort of political fatigue, until the tension snapped into focus with just one sentence. At the center of the storm sat Donald J. Trump. Confident as ever, he leaned back at the witness table, flipping through papers with the look of someone used to being in control. His signature navy suit and red tie made him look like the headline before the story even started. He didn't glance around much. He didn't need to. This wasn't new territory for him. Seated across the table, however, was someone Trump had underestimated. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of South Dallas didn't speak right away. Dressed sharply in a cobalt blue blazer and black-framed glasses, she adjusted her mic, calmly flipping to the page she wanted. "Mr. Trump," she said, her voice even and unshaken, "can you clarify why there were such inconsistencies in your 2019 and 2020 asset disclosures, particularly overseas?" Trump didn't miss a beat. He glanced up, smirked, and leaned into the microphone with all the smug confidence of someone who thought he already owned the room. "I've been more transparent than anyone here," he said with a flick of his hand as if swatting away the question. "Frankly, your tone is disrespectful." Crockett didn't blink. "Respect isn't a tone, Mr. Trump. It's earned." A few aides looked up from their notepads. Cameras zoomed in. C-SPAN's live chat picked up speed. But it was what happened next that lit the fuse. Trump paused, gave a half shrug, and muttered, "Sit down, girl." The room didn't gasp. It didn't yell. It stopped. Froze. The chairman paused with his gavel raised halfway, uncertain whether to call for order or let the silence speak. A few Republican members dropped their gazes. Staffers exchanged glances. No one moved. Jasmine Crockett didn't immediately respond. She blinked once, twice, let the moment settle. Then, with the same unshaken composure, she leaned forward and spoke again. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Trump," she said, not raising her voice, not breaking eye contact. "You may have addressed women like that your entire life, but I'm not here to serve you. I'm here to ask questions. So if my words make you uncomfortable, maybe that says more about your answers than it does about my tone." Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. Then, faintly, from behind her, a staffer whispered, "Damn." Crockett didn't acknowledge it. She kept going. "And one more thing," she said. "Dodging questions with condescension isn't confidence. It's avoidance. And you're not avoiding me today." Trump, for once, was at a loss. He tapped a pen, opened his mouth. Nothing came. The chairman finally spoke. "Mr. Trump, please respond to the question." But the moment had already moved beyond the room. It was no longer just about financial records. It was about who had the right to speak without being silenced, and whether power could still get away with brushing off accountability. News producers barely waited for the chairman's gavel to drop. Inside media booths, editors were already barking orders. "Clip it, push it, that's going viral." And they were right. Within 15 minutes, the moment had been trimmed, captioned, and blasted across platforms: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. The phrase "sit down, girl" was trending, but not for the reason Trump might have expected. In a small living room in Fort Worth, an elderly woman paused her ironing, watching the clip for the third time. She shook her head slowly. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered. "That girl just told him." But this wasn't just a viral soundbite. It touched something deeper. You could feel it. The room, the reaction, the resonance. It wasn't just about what was said. It was about what had been tolerated for too long and who had finally decided not to let it slide. That hearing room had seen plenty: outbursts, walkouts, even tears. But this wasn't a breakdown. It was a break in pattern. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam a desk. She didn't grandstand for the cameras. She simply turned the page and kept reading. Like the moment hadn't just cracked open decades of subtle, repeated disrespect. Representative Monica Rayburn, seated 2 spots down, watched her with quiet admiration. She didn't say much, just exhaled slowly and muttered under her breath, "That's how you do it." Across the aisle, Representative Neil Camden jotted something in his notebook, then whispered to his aide, "She just flipped the room." Trump's demeanor shifted. The grin was gone, his arms folded tighter. The smirk faded into something unreadable. Less arrogance, more confusion. As if he couldn't quite grasp how she'd held the room without ever raising the stakes. Still trying to find footing, he muttered into the mic, "I'm just saying, there's a way to talk to people." But no one answered. No one nodded. No one gave him the space he was used to commanding. And that may have been what unsettled him most, no longer the center of gravity. The chairman tapped his gavel. Not to rebuke, just to move forward. "Let's proceed," he said. "Representative Crockett, you still have the floor." And she did, in more ways than one. Crockett resumed questioning as if nothing unusual had occurred. No mention of the exchange, no lingering emotion. She asked her questions, flipped through her documents, and moved on, because that moment, though seismic, didn't need to be milked. It had already done its job. Outside the chamber, news vans adjusted their headlines. Trump tells Crockett, "Sit down, girl," during heated hearing. Inside the press rooms, producers scrambled, canceling planned segments to ride the wave. Across the country, Americans stopped what they were doing. In a bar in Columbus, Ohio, two middle school teachers on lunch break sat in stunned silence, watching a muted TV. One of them, Janice, mouthed the words, "Did he really just say that?" Her friend nodded, and she handled it like a sniper. In a dorm room in Tempe, Arizona, Malik Thomas, a political science major, opened his laptop and started a thread titled, "Why Jasmine Crockett's Response is Bigger Than the Moment." By sunrise, it had been shared over 90,000 times. Back in D.C., reporters gathered like satellites just outside the hearing doors. Everyone wanted to comment. But Crockett's team had already locked things down. She wouldn't be making a statement. Not yet. Instead, Jasmine Crockett walked out of the chamber quietly, flanked by staffers. No eye contact with the cameras. No headline-chasing smirk. Someone called her name. She didn't flinch. She wasn't chasing virality. She was doing her job. Later that evening, her communications director, Kiara Owens, picked up her phone and nearly dropped it. Over 2 million views in under 4 hours. Hashtags trending, civil rights leaders quoting her. Even A-list celebrities calling in for interviews. She turned toward Crockett, who was calmly reviewing case notes at her desk. "You know they're calling this the line of the decade, right?" Crockett didn't look up. "They can call it whatever they want," she said. "I call it Tuesday." While Crockett stayed focused, the rest of the country was just beginning to react. But before all the trending hashtags and media calls, before the speeches and the editorials, there was just Jasmine, a woman from St. Louis, Missouri, who had learned early on how to hold her ground. She was raised in a home where silence wasn't encouraged, but neither was speaking without purpose. Her mother worked the night shift at a health clinic, often coming home exhausted but proud. Her father drove a school bus, rarely missing a day, even in the snow. From an early age, Jasmine had a presence. Not loud, not flashy, but steady. Teachers noticed it. Classmates respected it. Jasmine didn't argue. One of her high school friends once joked, she cross-examined. At 16, she spent her Saturdays sitting in the back of municipal courts, not for class credit or a family connection, but just to listen. She liked how truth sounded when it had nowhere to hide. That's where it started. Her path wasn't built in campaign rooms or party back rooms. It was built in courtrooms. In Texarkana, Texas, fresh out of law school, where she took on a case no one else wanted. A young man, wrongly detained for 3 days, had no lawyer and no voice. The city hoped the case would disappear quietly. Crockett made sure it didn't. She stayed up late, combed through reports, dug up inconsistencies, and tracked down a witness the police had overlooked. When she walked into the courtroom, the judge raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're fresh out of law school?" "Only on paper," she replied. She won the case in under an hour. Word spread. In the following years, Crockett became the name people whispered when everything else had failed. Families dealing with eviction, people pushed out by land disputes, victims of excessive force. She didn't always get paid. Sometimes she didn't even ask. She took the cases others passed on because she knew what it meant to be overlooked. When she eventually ran for the state legislature, she wasn't the best funded or most connected. But she was known, and more importantly, she was trusted. She didn't speak like a politician. She didn't rehearse like one, either. She spoke like someone who had sat at kitchen tables with people who don't have PACs or publicists. That mattered. When she got to the Texas House, they told her to learn the game. Stay quiet. Play it safe. She didn't. In her first year, she introduced a bill curbing the use of aggressive policing tactics during protests. It didn't pass, but it got national attention. That was the first time many people saw her on TV, surrounded by men twice her age, holding her ground without raising her voice. Her tone didn't waver. Her eyes didn't wander. She smiled only when she meant it. By the time she ran for Congress, it wasn't about climbing the ladder. It was about widening the platform. "I'm tired of shouting from the hallway," she once said. "I want a seat at the table." And when she won, the first thing she did was send her mother a handwritten note. "You told me to make my voice matter. I found a bigger mic." So when Trump looked across that table and told her to sit down, she didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She'd heard worse from judges, developers, donors, and police chiefs who assumed she was just the help. But this time, millions of people were watching. Young girls who looked like her. Women who had been dismissed the same way. Generations of people who'd had to stay silent to keep the peace. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to slam her papers or storm out. She didn't even need to look angry. She did what she always did. She cut to the truth and let it land. The moment went viral. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling is where the story really deepened. The hearing officially ended just after 5:30 p.m., but the real energy surged the moment the microphones were turned off. Staffers packed up documents in a hurry. Reporters swarmed the exit, hoping to catch even a passing comment. Security ushered Trump out a side door, shielding him from the crowd of press waiting like a tide on the Capitol steps. Behind the dais, Jasmine Crockett remained still. She didn't rush. She didn't linger. She gathered her papers with the same calm that had carried her through the exchange. A junior staffer handed her a bottle of water. No words. Just a quiet nod. She took it, nodded back, and walked toward the hallway, eyes forward. She hadn't commented on the moment, not to the press, not to her colleagues. But everyone around her was already talking. Down the corridor, Representative Elaine Brewster leaned against a marble column, whispering into her phone. "Yes, I saw it live. No, she didn't flinch. And yes, he really said that." 2 floors down in the press room, chaos reigned. Reporters shouted into phones, tweets fired off every second. "Confirm Trump said girl on the record. Has Crockett released a statement yet? Find out if she's booked on MSNBC tonight." Inside a private office just off the floor, Trump was pacing, furious. That woman, he spat at an aide. She was being disrespectful. The aide didn't respond. He'd seen enough to know Crockett hadn't raised her voice once. Across the room, a group of PR advisors huddled by the window. One of them said, "Should we try spinning it as banter?" "No," someone else answered flatly. The tone didn't land. She was sharp, serious. "If we play it like a joke, it'll blow up." An intern added quietly, "We should have expected it. She's got that courtroom rhythm." Trump's ears perked. "What does that mean?" "It means," the aide replied carefully, "she doesn't take the bait. She lets you walk into your own mess." Back in Crockett's office, her communications director, Kiara, was pacing with her phone glued to her ear. It buzzed nonstop. CNN, MSNBC, The Root, BBC. Even a French outlet wanted comment. "I need to talk to her," Kiara said into the phone. "No, I don't think she's making a statement. She's not playing it that way." She looked over at Crockett, still at her desk, quietly reviewing paperwork. "You okay?" Crockett raised her eyes just slightly. "I'm fine. We didn't come here to trend. We came here to get answers." But even she knew. It was bigger than that now. Outside, a crowd had started to form. Protesters and supporters, some holding handmade signs, "Respect Black Women." Others had already printed T-shirts with her quote. Someone had even listed it on Etsy before the sun went down. As Crockett exited later that evening, a reporter managed to ask, "Do you feel disrespected, Congresswoman?" She paused, turned toward the mic, and simply said, "I feel focused." That single sentence was clipped and broadcast on every morning show the next day. Inside conservative media circles, the spin began. Some hosts replayed the exchange repeatedly, arguing that Trump's words were casual, nothing more than informal speech. Others tried to shift the conversation entirely. "But what about her attitude?" one host shouted. "What about her tone?" But something had shifted. It was no longer just about tone, it was about pattern. In progressive circles, the pushback was sharp and immediate. One commentator wrote, "Black women don't get to have bad days. They get told to sit down no matter how right, how prepared, or how composed they are." Meanwhile, Crockett's inbox flooded. Some messages were encouraging, others not so much. One stood out: "You didn't raise your voice, you didn't back down, you didn't blink. My daughter just asked me what your name was. That means something. Thank you." She read it 3 times. But the media firestorm was only beginning, and Trump's team was about to mount a new strategy. By nightfall, Trump's media machine was already shifting into overdrive. Yes, the clip had gone viral, but that didn't mean they were going to let the moment define the narrative. Not if they could help it. Inside a sleek Arlington office, a team of seasoned communications operatives gathered around a wide-screen monitor. For the 15th time that day, they replayed the clip. "She didn't yell," one advisor pointed out. "She didn't even get emotional." "That's what makes this harder." "Exactly," said another. "If she'd snapped back, we could have painted it as a meltdown, but she stayed cold and surgical." "So we flip it," someone suggested. "We say he was being casual, that she overreacted." An intern, seated quietly in the corner, spoke up. "But it doesn't sound casual." Silence followed. Even Trump, watching from Mar-a-Lago on a private stream, was visibly irritated. He leaned back in his chair and mumbled, "They'll forget about it in a week. We just need something louder to drown it out." The plan was quick and familiar. Distract, discredit, double down. First came the tweets from political allies and influencers. One senator posted, "That wasn't offensive, it was political theater." Crockett knew exactly what she was doing. Another pundit tweeted, "This is what happens when every comment is labeled as offensive. You can't even talk to each other without someone pulling the race card." The next morning, Trump called in to a conservative radio show out of Palm Springs. The host didn't waste time. "Do you regret what you said to Reper Crockett yesterday?" Trump chuckled. "Regret? No. It was a long hearing. She was dragging things out, and I said what I said. People are too sensitive these days." "But do you think it could have been?" "I didn't say anything wrong," he cut in. "And let me tell you something. Most people agree with me. They just don't want to say it out loud." He laughed, like it was all a game. But outside his circle, it wasn't landing. Meanwhile, back in Crockett's office, her silence was speaking volumes. Aside from her brief comment to the reporter on the Capitol steps, "I feel focused," she hadn't said a word. The lack of reaction stirred even more conversation. People wanted an interview, a statement, a press tour. But Crockett gave them something else: composure. That night, during a CBS News segment, political analyst Trevor Langford laid it out plainly. "This isn't about one phrase," he said. "It's about a pattern. A man who has spent decades believing his power gives him license to speak any way he wants, and a woman who reminded him that times have changed." Back in Texas, local stations aired pieces titled, "Who is Jasmine Crockett?" They profiled her legal wins, her advocacy work, her early days fighting for clients no one else would represent. Suddenly, people who had never heard her name were paying attention. Her staff, however, was feeling the pressure. Requests poured in from every direction: The Today Show, CNN, NPR, even late-night hosts reached out. But Crockett wasn't chasing spotlight. She told her team, "This isn't about what he said, it's about how I responded." Still, the online attacks came hard and fast. Doctored images, fake quotes, clips spliced out of context, all designed to frame her as hostile, angry, out of control. One video racked up thousands of views in far-right circles, showing every moment she'd ever interrupted a speaker, labeling her as combative. But it didn't stick, because for every manipulated video there were 5 more real ones, showing her calm, measured, and precise. One journalist, Maya Latin, wrote a column that echoed across timelines. "We don't ask men to be smaller to be heard. We ask women to smile while being dismissed." Crockett didn't smile. She corrected. And that landed harder than any outburst ever could. Trump's defenders got louder. But it started to sound like shouting over a crowd that had already stopped listening. And deep down, even Trump knew. This wasn't going away quietly. While Trump's circle scrambled to regain control of the headlines, the rest of the country had already moved on to a different conversation, one that Crockett didn't have to lead, because she had already sparked it. By day 3, the story was everywhere. Morning shows broke it down frame by frame. Late-night comedians delivered monologues. Political science professors dissected it in ethics classes. The noise was loud, but it wasn't aimless. For once, people weren't just reacting. They were reflecting. In Birmingham, Alabama, a high school debate coach named Lorraine Reeves played the clip for her students. Then she paused the screen and asked, "What did you see?" A girl in the front row said he didn't expect her to answer like that. Another added, "It's like he thought she wouldn't respond at all." The room nodded. Not because they'd been taught to, but because they knew exactly what had just happened. In Des Moines, Iowa, a retired librarian named Tom Beck posted something simple on Facebook. "I'm 76. I've seen my share of scandals and speeches. But this wasn't about party. This was about whether we still let power talk down to people like they don't belong in the room." It was shared over 20,000 times. And in Phoenix, Arizona, a woman named Farah Densley, who had never posted a political video in her life, shared a shaky, heartfelt message on her front porch. "My daughter's going to grow up in a world where she hears a sentence like that," she said, voice cracking, "and she'll know exactly what it means, and also exactly how to answer it." Even comedians joined the conversation. But not just for laughs. During a Hamilton show stand-up night in Brooklyn, comic Will Ortega said, "She didn't clap back. She didn't pop off. She told the truth. And that shook people more than a yell ever could." Still, the division was clear. Crockett's inbox overflowed, thousands of messages, some uplifting, others deeply hostile. One message, in all caps, read, "You are what's wrong with this country. Sit down," just like he said. She didn't reply, she never did with those, but her staff saw them. Kiara, her communications director, scrolled late one night, whispering to herself, "It's always louder when they feel seen." "Yeah," Crockett said softly from across the room, "because silence protects them." And outside her office, the world wasn't silent anymore. Social media adopted her as a symbol. Black women began quoting her in Instagram captions. Young girls posted side-by-side photos of Crockett and the women who came before her, Shirley Chisholm, Barbara Jordan, Michelle Obama. Threads exploded across platforms, breaking down the phrase, "Sit down, girl," like it was a thesis on power and gender. But this wasn't just an internet moment. In Spokane, Washington, a group of middle-aged women started a handwritten letter campaign to thank Crockett. Over 300 envelopes showed up in her office that week. Then came the polls. An independent survey showed something rare, a measurable increase in her approval among voters aged 40 to 60, across both political parties. Even more surprising, nearly 40% of independents said her response made them want to learn more about her policy views. That's when it became clear. This wasn't just a trending hashtag, it was a shift. And yet, behind closed doors, Crockett remained grounded. She didn't cry, she didn't gloat, she didn't plan a media tour. But she did call her dad. "You sounded like your mama in that hearing," he told her. Crockett laughed. She would have thrown her shoe. "Nah," he said. She would have made him hand it back to her first. It was a rare moment of lightness in a week that had grown heavier than anyone expected. Because while the rest of the country argued, praised, criticized, or spun, one truth stood still. Crockett didn't ask for the spotlight. She just didn't duck when it found her. 3 days after the hearing, something unexpected happened. The national spotlight, which had zoomed in on a single moment between Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump, began to stretch out, reaching places that didn't usually make the news. Living rooms, classrooms, hair salons, church basements. People were no longer just retweeting the clip. They were talking, really talking, about voice, about power, about what it means to speak and be heard, especially when you're not expected to. And then a message arrived. It didn't come from a news anchor or a senator. It wasn't from a supporter trying to get a campaign sign. It was from someone who knew the weight of those words because she had carried them too. Buried between dozens of press inquiries and booking requests, Kiara spotted the subject line, "Thank you from Tulsa." There was no flashy signature. No job title. Just a name. Clara Bishop. Expecting another polite thank you, Kiara opened it and froze. Dear Representative Crockett, I've watched the hearing clip 5 times now. I'm 68 years old. I've never written to a politician in my life. But when he told you to sit down, I heard my high school principal's voice from 1973, telling me, you're not the kind of girl who gives speeches. When you looked up at him, not with fury, not with fear, but with purpose, I felt like I was 17 again. I felt like I mattered. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for every woman who's ever been asked to shrink so someone else could feel bigger. Thank you. With deep respect, Clara Bishop, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Kiara didn't forward it immediately. She just sat with it. The next morning, she handed her phone to Crockett. Read this. Crockett took her time. Silent. Still. When she was finished, she placed the phone down gently. Do you want me to respond? Kiara asked. Crockett didn't answer right away. Then, no. I want to meet her. 3 days later, her office arranged it quietly. No press, no entourage, no campaign footage, just a visit to a public library in downtown Tulsa. When Clara walked in wearing a tan coat and carrying a worn leather notebook, Crockett stood and smiled. I'm not here as a congresswoman today, she said. Just Jasmine. Clara smiled back. And I'm not 68 today. I'm 17. You gave me that. They talked for over an hour. No cameras, no speeches, just truth. Clara shared stories of growing up in segregated neighborhoods, of being overlooked at work by men she had trained. I stopped raising my hand, she said. Figured there wasn't much point. Crockett leaned in, asked questions. At one point, Clara pulled a folded clipping of Shirley Chisholm from her notebook. When I was little, she was the one we thought would crack it wide open. She did. Crockett replied. She cracked it. Now we keep widening it. When the visit ended, Clara's granddaughter, who had quietly driven her there, snapped a photo of them by the library window. Just the two of them, mid-laugh. Later that day, she posted it with a simple caption, My grandma met her hero today. That photo spread faster than any press release ever could. Ava DuVernay reposted it. So did Sherilyn Eiffel and Tracy Ellis Ross. Each added their own caption about legacy, courage, and passing the baton. CNN picked it up under the headline, The Letter That Said Everything Without a Microphone. Interview requests flooded in, for Clara this time. She declined them all. Except one. She agreed to write a guest piece for her local paper, the Tulsa Sentinel. It was titled, The Day I Felt Heard. And in it she described Crockett not as a politician, but as a mirror, held up to a nation far too comfortable looking away. Crockett issued no statement, no tweet, no fundraiser. When asked about it in an interview weeks later, she simply said, Some moments belong to the people who live them, not the people who watched. That quote became a banner headline on 3 different blogs the next morning. That quiet meeting in Tulsa, one letter, one photo, one conversation, left a bigger mark than most viral clips ever could. It reminded people that real impact doesn't always come from the loudest rooms. Sometimes it starts with a sentence, a pause, a reply that hits just right, and it ripples. But while the story settled into the hearts of people across the country, something else was beginning to shift. This time, inside the very walls where it all began. The House of Representatives isn't known for moving quickly, not for public outrage, not for media storms, and rarely for its own internal culture. But this was different. A week after the hearing, the Ethics Committee called a closed-door emergency session. No press, no cameras, just 12 members from both sides of the aisle staring at a screen, replaying the same 47-second clip again. Sit down, girl. Pause, then Crockett's reply. Silence. Even those who usually scoffed at media optics admitted this wasn't just a bad look. It was a breaking point. Some representatives wanted to let it pass. Others, especially those facing tight re-election races, urged for at least a statement. Not targeting Trump by name, but addressing the broader issue of decorum, of how elected officials and invited witnesses address each other. It's not about censorship, one member reportedly said. It's about standards. The resulting language was weak, a formal reminder about professionalism. But it was still a crack in the wall. A moment of recognition that maybe, just maybe, lines had been crossed for too long without consequence. Meanwhile, on the House floor, quieter conversations were happening. Procedural reforms were being discussed, clearer boundaries for witness conduct, even a proposal for orientation briefings before high-profile testimonies. Because apparently, in this new era, even former presidents needed a crash course on respect. Outside of Congress, the response took a more visible form. Crockett received invitations from across the country: Stanford, Harvard, a surprise request from a community college in Jackson, Mississippi. She accepted them all. At Stanford, she didn't talk about Trump. Instead, she opened with a story about her first landlord-tenant case, representing a single mother on the brink of eviction. They weren't waiting for headlines, she told the students. They were waiting for someone to speak clearly, to make room for truth. At Harvard, she spoke about the idea of tone, how women, especially women of color, are told they're too loud, even when whispering, too emotional, even when composed. And in Jackson, she set her notes aside entirely. "What do you do?" she asked the room. "When someone tells you to sit down?" A student in the front row answered without hesitation, "You stand up." Crockett smiled. "Even if your knees shake." Back in Washington, her style started rubbing off. Younger members of Congress began adopting her phrasing, not mimicking her, but echoing her clarity, her firmness, her refusal to shrink. It wasn't trend following. It was permission. A shift in posture. Direct didn't feel so abrasive anymore. Honest didn't feel so risky. Crockett stayed on task. She introduced 2 new bills, one on data transparency in government contracts, and another on civil protections during emergency detentions. Neither bill had anything to do with the hearing, but both were rooted in the same idea: truth without theatrics works best in daylight. Behind the scenes, Trump was still seething. At a closed-door fundraiser in Pensacola, he complained about the hearing being a setup. "She had an attitude," he told donors. "Whole thing was a trap." One attendee asked if he regretted what he said. Trump laughed, then changed the subject. The world kept spinning, and Crockett's staff kept working. They didn't have time to chase the headlines, they were too busy answering the mail. And that's when they noticed something. The tone of the messages had changed. Less fanfare, more reflection. One woman from Santa Fe wrote, "I've worked in finance for 20 years, been called girl more times than I can count, never said anything. But after watching you, I asked my boss to use my name. That's all. Just my name. It felt like a win." Another message came from a teenage boy in Oregon. "I showed the video to my mom. She cried. Then she told me stories. Now I get it. Thank you." Crockett read every one of them. She didn't save the headlines. She saved the letters. While Crockett pushed forward with policy and her team worked through an overflowing inbox, one question lingered quietly in the background, one that couldn't be answered by a headline or a trending topic. What does respect look like when no one's watching? Because eventually, as it always does, the clip faded from the front page. The trending hashtags slowed down. New controversies emerged. New distractions arrived to fill the airwaves. But for many people, that moment didn't just vanish. It settled into memory, not because it was dramatic, but because it revealed something deeply familiar to those who had lived it. It asked questions many had stopped expecting answers to. And in the months that followed, Jasmine Crockett never once called it a viral moment, never framed it as historic, never leaned into it for branding. She didn't package it with glossy edits or campaign slogans, because she understood something most politicians don't. Real change doesn't happen in noise. It happens in decisions, in how you carry yourself when the cameras aren't on. She kept showing up to hearings, sharp questions, steady tone. She wrote bills that barely made the news, but that impacted real lives: contracts, housing, police accountability. She met with constituents in modest settings: strip malls, school gyms, church basements. She listened. She answered the same questions a dozen times if needed. She never mentioned the moment. And that's what made people respect her even more. It wasn't about clapping back. It wasn't about a viral victory. It was the steadiness afterward that stuck with them. She didn't try to become the story. She just kept doing the work. At a parent-teacher forum in Flagstaff, Arizona, a school counselor stood up and said, "My daughter saw that clip. She didn't just see a woman being insulted. She saw a woman respond like she knew who she was." That matters. In a time when outrage sells, Crockett's calm became something rare, something radical. Because here's the truth. There are still too many rooms in this country where respect is unevenly distributed, too many tables where only certain voices are heard, too many conversations where power still expects submission. But moments like that one, clear, quiet, and unflinching, don't just call out the imbalance. They show us what resistance looks like when it's delivered without rage. They remind us that composure isn't weakness, that stillness isn't silence, that not shrinking is its own kind of protest. Crockett didn't win anything that day. She didn't destroy her opponent or dominate a debate. What she did was more lasting. She reminded a nation what strength actually looks like. It's not always loud. It's not always fire. Sometimes it's just someone refusing to look away. Sometimes it's answering with words that don't need volume to be undeniable. So what's the lesson? Maybe it's this. If you know who you are, you don't have to prove it every time someone tries to test you. You don't need to match their energy. You just need to hold your own. Because people notice. They remember how you carried yourself, how you didn't flinch, how you made it clear without ever being cruel. That stays with them, in courtrooms, in classrooms, in offices and hearings and living rooms across the country. That's how truth travels. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or something you felt, or a moment where you stayed quiet when you could have spoken up, don't let it end here. Talk about it. Share it. Remember it. And if you want more stories that go beyond the headlines, stories that matter, subscribe. We're not here for the noise. We're here for the truth. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.